Hello, everyone. I am Dan Casey, and welcome to today's episode of Nerdist News Talks Back. It's our weekly over-the-top talk show about all things pop culture, and thank you so much for joining us. Now, today's show is brought to you by The New Mutants, available tomorrow on digital, Blu-ray, and 4K Ultra HD. And in celebration of The New Mutants release tomorrow, we're going to be doing a very special The New Mutants-themed episode of Nerdist News Talks Back. We're going to dive into the comic book history, talk about how they brought this fan-favorite Marvel Comics series to life on the big screen, and show you a never-before-seen deleted scene, as well as an exclusive interview with Dani Moonstar herself, actress Blu Hunt. All of that and more on today's Nerdist News Talks Back. But first, let's meet our panel. So I used Cerebro to assemble two of the biggest New Mutants fans I know for today's show. So first up, you've seen her everywhere from DC Daily to Collider Heroes to right here on Nerdist and Geek and Sundry. And now you can catch her streaming on twitch.tv/enthusiamy. It's Amy Dallen.
Hello, it is so good to be here. Dan is right. I have loved these characters for so long. It's a little unreal to get to be like, let's talk about their movie versions. So I'll just bask in that while we get started.
Yes, and you have some of the OG collectibles too. That's something that I was super stoked to see as well. In addition to your deep appreciation for these characters, you came to play. So I appreciate that.
I did. There'll be show and tell.
Yes, yes. All right. And last but certainly not least, he is the host of Correctamundo on the El Rey Network, co-host of Nerdist Book Club, and the 500 Greatest Films podcast. It's Hector Navarro. And Hector Miaro? Who is that? Who is this cat?
This is Keiki. She loves to be held. She's just bothering me, you know.
Oh.
She loves it. She's so sweet. She was excited about I'm sorry, I was so distracted waiting for this incredible intro.
It's your own little Lockheed.
Exactly.
She just keeps bothering me. Like, are you gonna come up in my lap or what? Come on, I'm working here. What's going on? And then when she did,
she has some strong thoughts about this movie, this comic series, these characters. Young mutants all dealing with their own unique struggles while they came to terms with their incredible powers. Now, the first volume of the series went on for a staggering 100 issues before they eventually turned into X-Force, although the New Mutants would pop up time and time again in the years that followed. And for many fans, the series kind of came into its own around issue 18 when artist Bill Sienkiewicz took over, bringing his signature avant-garde art style and dark tone to the series, which in turn inspired much of the visual aesthetic of the movie. So my question to the panel is, what is your earliest memory of the New Mutants? When do you first remember discovering and encountering this group? Amy, let's start with you.
Okay, so as a baby comics fan, X-Men was my doorway into a lot of stuff. The X-Men animated series, then the comics, and then I discovered actually Generation X, the mid to late 90s team of X kids. And that was the sort of first thing that I was trying to hunt down all of. And one of my favorite characters in it was Husk. So in tracking down Paige Guthrie's history, I was like, she's got a brother. He's got a book. He's done a whole bunch of stuff. And somehow that road led me. I was like, I can't collect all of X-Men. I am a kid. That's impossible. But these New Mutants, this could be my jam. And I got a hold of I love the Sienkiewicz stuff, but the actual original, the Claremont McLeod and then Sal Buscema issues, look, there's some wild stuff that happens in those early issues of New Mutants, but the original graphic novel and those issues are what I bonded to. The thing that they were doing with this incredibly cool, like, no two members of this team are the same. It is very consciously trying to represent a whole bunch of different stuff, and you can judge it by look, it's all going to be very early 80s. It's dense comics, it's Scottish accents, it's a lot of that stuff, but it's what made me a fan forever, and it's why I have mini-mates of the New Mutants that have been sitting here waiting to get their movie for a long, long time. So yeah, that love never goes away. I can't believe Dani Moonstar has a movie. Are you kidding?
Yeah, right. I mean, I hear you because I did sort of, I had the benefit of growing up with my father. He was an avid comic book collector ever since his youth. So I had this like library of Alexandria dating back to when comics cost like 10 cents on the cover. And I loved tearing through all the old yellowed pages of the X-Men books. And I tried to get into some of the others, what like X Factor, X Force, but for some reason it just wasn't, it didn't capture that same feeling as when I was reading the original X-Men books. But when I discovered New Mutants as a kid, I was like, oh, this is cool. These like, I think it's the same reason people gravitate towards a character like Peter Parker, for example. It feels relatable. It feels like they're going through the same struggles. Not that I was dealing with my own psychic powers. I just had normal headaches. But I think that for now. So I think it was just like an easy way to draw myself in and project myself into characters that felt like they were of an age that I was. And also just, yeah, even the early art style before the Sienkiewicz of it all, it was just like something that draws you in and you're like, who are these new like, wait, there's another team and they're younger. This is amazing. So yeah, definitely a way to resonate beyond what I was expecting. But Hector, what about you? What was your earliest New Mutants memory?
I was trying to figure it out, and Amy a second ago was describing to our younger viewers the world before the internet, and it was a horrifying world. If you don't have a Library of Alexandria like Dan did, you had to. I don't know what you had to do, but one thing that I did is that I went to my local library as soon as I started to get into the Marvel universe and comic books and superheroes, and the cartoon shows were great gateways, but also the X-Men in the '90s were like incredibly complex. Like by the time that if you went to go get a New Mutants comic in the 90s, Cable was in it. Like it was a completely different book than the thing we're talking about today. So I tried to track it down. I was like, what was my first exposure to these characters and to this idea? And I think it was this book that I found in the library. Years later as an adult, I bought it. And it's this book right here, Marvel, 5 Fabulous Decades of the World's Greatest Comics. This is when
Oh my
Marvel was only
goodness.
50 years old. And in this book, this is the book where I learned about people like Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and everybody. And in this book, when they go through the history of the early 80s of Marvel, there's the new, they're talking about Sienkiewicz, but they're also talking about what the New Mutants were. And then I remember later I got this book right here, which is like a late 90s, early 2000s, like DK, encyclopedia book. And sure enough, I think my first real exposure to these characters were these little sort of summarized encyclopedic entries where it's like, and there's this whole other team of young people, and they're dealing with demon bears, and they're dealing with Legion, and they're dealing with the Hellions and all this stuff. So I always knew that they were this side concept that came in at a time where, like you guys are all saying, at this point, all the X-Men characters were aged up and they're adults or they're late teens, early 20s or whatever. And the New Mutants, to answer that question, well, why is this thing still relevant? Why do people still care? Is because it injected back into the X-Men brand the idea of having young people be the central focus of these stories. Because I think the further away you get from, and I'm gonna sort of knock Chris Claremont a little bit here for a second. He's an amazing writer, but this dude had some out there ideas. And the further and further away you get from that core idea of what the X-Men are, young people with emerging power and drama, and them dealing with a world that hates them and dealing with tolerance and acceptance and everything. The further away you get from that, the more you go into space and the Shi'ar and the Starjammers, and that stuff's fun, but like you lose what the X-Men is and kind of should be about. And the New Mutants honestly brought that. And they're also super diverse for that time in the comics, and they're international, and these characters had accents. And so it's always going to be relevant to have Peter Parker style characters, like you said, Dan, in comic books, because comics are supposed to be for young people to help them learn not to be jerks.
And I think that definitely this comic in particular is instructive in that, because you see these people working through complex emotions, their own tolerance issues, with everything from people who are different than them to people who maybe dabble in the occult. So it's definitely, it's teaching tolerance for outsider art and witches as well. But yeah, I definitely think it resonates with people, much like the original X-Men comics did back in the day, because you're taking these people who are othered by society in some way, shape, or form, who don't fit into a particular mold, and you are not only telling their story, but you also get the heightened action of the superhero story of it all, because, you know, they all happen to have amazing powers. In the chat as well, Megalo Blazemon says, X-Men Evolution was their first exposure to New Mutants. They were fun, carefree mutants who loved to play with their powers, mischievous. And Bruce Paulson says their first exposure was at the theater a few weeks ago. And that's the cool thing about this, is because hopefully this movie it'll open up the world of New Mutants to a new generation of folks who maybe missed out on the comics, because, you know, unlike things with like X Factor, X Force, it doesn't have X in the name, so you might not understand what this is at first glance. You might be willing to just pass it over. So how would you say that they are different than the X-Men? Amy, let's start with you.
Well, I think Hector put the nail on the head. I obviously, with Gen X being my gateway in, I am a sucker for the new set of kids get inducted. Welcome to the X-Men. Hope you survive the experience. All of those things will always sort of work on me as story hooks. And I love it across, like, I love Avengers Academy, all of the sort of set of young kids ones. And on the Marvel side, the New Mutants were the originals in that mold. Like, they were the first spinoff. They were like, we think the X-Men are dead. Bunch of kids are coming in. Dani Moonstar doesn't want to wear a uniform because she has things that are important to her, and she thinks that Xavier needs to respect that. And that left a huge impression on me. There's so much energy in those character concepts and those early conflicts, and Xavier trying to figure out, like, I can't just run every school. Like, I kind of got lucky with my first couple sets of students. I need to figure out how this works with these kids. Like, it was early 80s generation gap energy. And that has just, it makes them feel so special, and their relationships to each other feel so special. We were talking beforehand, the friendships among this group are some of my favorite relationships anywhere in fiction, and they've had their ups and downs over like 40 years of comics since then. But I you know, you literally love to see it.
Yes, and I love to see a lot of that stuff brought to life in this film, but I'm curious for the panel, what did you like the most about how this movie brought the comics to life? So Hector, let's start with you on this one.
First of all, it always depresses me when somebody talks about the early 80s being 40 years ago. Oh my God. Amy, don't do that again.
I had to do the math because I was like, you know, recently.
Oh my goodness. You know what was honestly really great about seeing these characters brought to life? I mentioned it a second ago. For some reason, it really does matter to me, but like getting to hear Wolfsbane's Scottish accent, getting to hear Ilyana Rasputin's Russian accent, like it's even like Sam's like really Southern, like Appalachian, you know, which is specifically written. Chris Claremont writes it in a specific way, you know, with a lot of apostrophes, and you know, it's just very like chunky, clunky. It sounds so dumb, but that to me makes the comics even come to life more, because when I will read comics now, when I read the New Mutants now, I'm hearing Maisie Williams, you know what I mean? And it's just, it adds one more level of like, of strengthening that reality, of making it just a little bit more real. So that's just like one thing that I really, really appreciated about I really dug that about getting to see him in person.
I will say one of the purest pleasures of going back and reading New Mutants comics is then trying to read Claremont's dialogue aloud, especially for Rayne and Sam, just because they do feel like bombastic sort of accents, but they really work for the character. You immediately get a sense in place of who these people are, but it's also just very funny to go back and just be like, all right, well, let's put my Scottish accent to the test. But maybe that's just me.
Wait, can we hear it?
Nah. No, you can't. I can't right now. I would offend too many people and have to issue an apology to the great people of Scotland. So I will spare you. But Amy, what do you like the most about how this movie brought the comics to life?
I will say that probably my favorite moments of watching them come to life are that they made some I think good choices about sort of who to put at the center of the story. You know, they could have been like, we picked 2 new mutants and we made up 4 new people, and I would have been very disappointed. Not that, you know, I don't also love when original characters come into things, but I like that they kind of knew who they wanted to work with. And honestly, some of the visual touches, like seeing Ilyana grab that sword and armor up, that just was a very cool moment to get to see brought to life. And that stuff's really going to stick with me.
Yeah, and you get that little glimpse into Limbo as well. Like Colossus, far and away, I think it used to be Nightcrawler for a long time, but Colossus, I think, is my favorite overall member of the X-Men, and I've always had a soft spot for Ilyana as a result of my fandom of Colossus too. So just getting to see that, and also just see like her bringing a sword out of nowhere, then cutting a hole through space and time to another dimension, that was pretty awesome. But I think for me, my favorite aspect of this, and we'll touch on this a little bit later on in the show, is getting to see, especially going back. I just reread the Demon Bear Saga, like on which this movie is based. I went back, and some of the scenes in the movie, they take Bill Sienkiewicz's art. It's basically transposed onto the screen, like where you have Cannonball and Magic squaring off with this gigantic demonic bear. And obviously not in some sort of mythical Badland plane this time around, but still a fitting place for a showdown. But just getting to see how they really captured the aesthetic of that artwork, which had such a impact on me when I first encountered it, it was really awesome to see on the big screen. But let's move on. We started talking about the team a little bit. So let's talk about the New Mutants as a team. Let's talk about the members of the team that we see in this version of the film, which consists of Dani Moonstar, aka Psyche, aka Mirage. We have Cannonball, Sam Guthrie. We have Magic, Sunspot, and of course Wolfsbane. So what do you think about the team dynamics in the comics as compared to what we see in the movie? Because it's obviously a different circumstance, because, when we meet them in the comics, they are all part of the same school together. Whereas here, they feel like they are brought together by fate almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hector, let's start with you.
I think that the real fun thing was that watching the movie, I'm in my early 30s. Anytime I watch anything with teens, I'm always like, these teens are too, come on, guys, come on, get it together. Come on, teens, what are you doing? You're so angsty. And then I went back and was rereading some of the Chris Claremont New Mutant stuff, but also I got to read Demon Bear for the first time. And I had been specifically waiting to see the film first, and then to go back and, the whole New Mutants line has always been a comic series of mine that is one of my kind of maybe biggest gaps in sort of comic book, like actually going through and reading it. Like I said, I know all about them because all my encyclopedias, I'm all caught up, but to go back and read some of that stuff, but then getting to read the Demon Bear specifically for the first time was so great. And then reading the interactions, I'm going back to the movie and I'm like, you know what? Maybe a little exaggerated, but I'm not going to lie. Chris Claremont had that stuff in there where these teens are just the shortest fuses. Like they just are going to snap at each other. And so I was like, yeah, for the movie running time, they did cram in a lot of that dynamic that you really sort of get over issues and issues and issues. So I think that the dynamic between the teens in the movie was really well done.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. When I went back to reread it, like you have multiple team members snapping at each other every couple of pages. And you got to remember, it's not just like we all talk about when you're a teenager, your body's changing, but quite literally, they are developing powers beyond their control that could kill themselves or other people if they're not careful. They're all dealing with a lot of trauma and trying to work through that. And I thought it was a fascinating way to update that in the form of, instead of placing them at Xavier's School for Gifted and Talented Youngsters, you have them in this sort of mysterious, like healthcare facility, mental health care facility, a place where they can kind of learn about their powers safely.
Right.
But I'm curious, speaking of their powers, who do we think is the most powerful New Mutant team member? Amy, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Let's see. I'm going to gently side with the movie without revealing anything and say probably Dani Moonstar. For raw, like, punch and power, traditionally Sunspot. But he's got his whole daytime situation going on. He's got some limits of his own. And Dani Moonstar, even if I have to use my imagination to be like, and someday she's going to be a Valkyrie and she's going to go on these adventures and those, she's already starting with a ton of power. And like you said, Dan, in the very first, after the graphic novel, once they're all at the school, in the first issue of New Mutants, it starts with her inadvertently using her powers on fellow classmate Karma, who's another one of my faves. So they are drawing on a lot of very real elements in interpersonal, but I will say my favorite element is the friendships. Okay, sorry, that was my...
The real power was the friendships we made along the way. No, but that does cut that. We'll get into that in just a moment. But Hector, I want to ask you the same question. Who do you think is the most powerful New Mutants team member?
I normally would have sided with Amy because when it comes to comic book stuff, you always want to side with Amy Dallen because she's always right. But I'm going to be wrong in this instance, and I'm going to say that the movie, again, look, man, I love Marvel Comics, and I've always loved, just as a side example, Ant-Man was always cool. It wasn't until the Ant-Man movie came out, you know what I mean, where you can actually like really get a visualization of like, look at what they did with that. Oh, okay, this is actually incredibly powerful and cool. And it's stuff that certain things would unlock in your brain that weren't unlocking as you read years and years of that comic. The same thing happened with Ilyana Rasputin for me with magic, because I'm watching the movie and I'm like, the fact that I've always known that she goes to limbo, like opens portals, you know what I mean? Like has a friendship with Kitty Pryde's Dragon Lockheed, like all that stuff was there visually, the soul sword. Yeah, I got it. But then watching the movie, I'm like, holy crap, this is terrifying. And she's super powerful, and the armored arm comes up, and I thought it looked so cool. So the fact that we would see these glimpses of limbo terrified me and made me think, I feel like I'm realizing that Ilyana is probably the most powerful at this stage in their career in this film.
I appreciate those caveats, because I do think that, there's certain things where, Amy, you mentioned like Sunspot having the most sort of raw punching power as we see in the comics. And I was rereading earlier, and there's one line in the comics where they're like, "Hey, Roberto, can you like make sure no one comes through this door?" And he like goes full like flame on Sunspot mode. And he's like, "No power on earth shall budge this door as long as I stand here." And they're like, "Okay, buddy, calm down. I just mean don't let the nurse in." And I just love that sort of like bombast and pomp and circumstance for it. And
he's such a bro, by the way. He's such a bro. He's the guy that takes his shirt off. What's up? You need me to? What's up? Like, just hold the door. That's all we're asking.
I loved that in this movie. Like instantly, I was like, I know exactly who you are. I know people like you. I went to college with people like you. Great job. Also, fantastic abs. But in this movie, I would probably have to agree and say, I think in terms of just maybe raw power at this point that they can control, I think maybe it is magic. In terms of untapped potential, probably Dani Moonstar, because,
right.
As you'll see in the movie, they both have an effect on one another, and they butt heads for good reason. I think it's because game recognized game. Yeah. But now I do want to move on to friendships and especially relationships in this movie. So one of the things that this movie puts front and center is the relationship between Dani Moonstar and Rayne Sinclair. And I think it's one of the best parts of this movie. So I want to talk a little bit about that. How did that resonate with you? What did it mean to you to see this on the screen, especially as it compares to the comics? So Amy, let's start with you.
Oh, I'm just enthusiastically co-signing all of that. I do think it was one of the best things in the movie. It was sweet. It gives you, I love the way, like, being a huge X-Men person, but not a huge horror movie person, even though I love Demon Bear, I'm a big fan of, like, it gives you something to root for. As all this unsettling stuff is coming out, as you're learning about these versions of everybody's origins and their pasts, having that beautiful like through line to sort of follow through the movie as everything else swirls around them, I thought was a great choice. I have always loved their bond in the comics. The New Mutants have often had queer characters that are some of my very faves, like the aforementioned Karma. And so I thought it was both in the spirit of all of that and like a really lovely evolution of their characters. It was really sweet and I loved it.
Yeah, and we were chatting about this a bit earlier before the show. One of the things that really stood out to me is they present a queer relationship between these two characters, but it is not something that they make a big deal about because it normalizes queer relationships in the way that they are normal in everyday life. Like whether you know it or not, a queer person, queer people, they exist all around us, and X-Men has always embraced that, as did the New Mutants. So it was refreshing to see that, especially in a giant movie based on a massive Marvel Comics franchise, to just present that front and center in a sort of genre where you don't see that a lot. It's sort of relegated to a very side story or like something that's just kind of like mentioned in passing. But seeing this presented front and center was really refreshing. And also, I just love these two actresses. They do a great job at sort of making this feel like a natural just like relationship on the big screen. And yeah, I was very impressed by their performances, and it felt true to their comic book counterparts. But Hector, what do you think?
I mean, well said. I think it's some of the strongest stuff in the movie. It's just so endearing and so sweet. And what's cool is that I think that there is a, it doesn't come from nowhere, because Amy mentioned like the friendship and the relationship that these two characters have in the comic books. And going back, and if you go and read those or reread those, like when Wolfsbane is in her wolf form, she can communicate psychically, telepathically with Dani. But then that's the only way she can talk, because when she's full wolf, she can't speak. And then she has to revert to like her half wolf form when Dani's not around, because the other New Mutants are like, okay, we can't understand you, Rayne. Like, can you please back out, so that you can communicate. So I think that there is, I mean, look, I'm just looking at this cover as well. And it's like these two characters are there. These young people are holding on to each other and they're embracing one another. And I love that, whether the comics at the time in the early 80s could portray that stuff as much as they wanted to. I mean, we got to give credit to Chris Claremont for bringing us North Star and Alpha Flight, one of the first sort of openly gay superhero characters in comics history. I feel like this movie is recognizing that and being like, look, if this story were told today, which is what the movie is doing, they're going to look at what kinds of stories we can tell and who we can represent. And it just seems like such a no-brainer. And they're so sweet. It's not something that at all feels like it's put in there to try and, make something very 2020 or make something very modern. It's like, no, that feels like that's what the X-Men has always been about, whether it's been on the surface or whether it's been in the subtext. So it was awesome to see.
Yeah, and I think that's something that as well X-Men and New Mutants have done very well, is reflect the world around us, even when it's something we don't necessarily want to look at, because people are encountering prejudice, they're encountering otherization, they're encountering their own trials and travails that often go unnoticed. And by centering them in a story, no matter the scope of it, whether it's a comic or the movie, you make a different group of people have to consider that and empathize with them and connect with them on a human level. And I think that's ultimately what all of these Children of the Atom stories, connect back to.
Yeah.
But something else I want to talk about is, we're talking about these, bringing these comic book characters to life. Who was your favorite performance in the movie as compared to their comic book counterpart? So Hector, I see you rubbing your hands. Let's start with you.
Wolfsbane, baby. Maisie Williams, I think, was perfectly cast. And what I loved about her performance is that she is just an open wound, this poor girl. She's so vulnerable. And that is early Wolfsbane in these comics. You read these comics and she's like, correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, please. Is she like the youngest member of the team when the sort of team first comes together? Like,
I want to say she is. It's a little unclear. Like, Kitty comes in and out, and it's a little unclear how old she's supposed to be right now, but she considers herself much more grown up and mature than the others.
Kitty Pride's a whole nother thing. Kitty comes in, 13-year-old, she hangs with the New Mutants for like a week, and she's like, I'm gonna go be part of the X-Men.
Yeah, I got promoted.
Okay, but
I got moved up a grade.
You can hang out with my dragon. You're my roommate, Ilyana Rasputin. We're friends. Bye. Like, Kitty, okay. She's great. She's fantastic. And another cool thing, well, we'll talk about it later, but I want to circle back to something with Kitty. But I think Maisie Williams was so sweet. Anytime she was on screen, I was like, we must protect her at all costs. She's so great. And then when she was able to unleash and kind of Hulk out and Wolfsbane out and become that version of the character, and without giving too much away, like really get into that action stuff, I thought that she killed it. And clearly, as somebody who has only seen the first season of Game of Thrones, clearly I'm like, yes, this is why, from what I understand of pop culture around me, she is a favorite actor and character within that show, just from beginning to end. And I'm like, yeah, of course. Who could doubt it? She's amazing.
Yeah. She is fantastic in basically everything she does. And it was a no-brainer that she killed it in this role in particular. And especially there was a moment in the comics too, where she's standing next to this police officer and he calls her like short stuff or shorty or something. You get a sense of how short she is when she's not in wolf form. And I was like, oh yeah, another way. They crushed it. Maisie Williams, not a very tall person, but gives an outsized performance. But Amy, I'm curious, who was your pick for favorite performance as compared to their comic book counterpart?
Oh, I feel bad because it's also gonna be Maisie.
Yeah.
Don't feel bad.
I honestly, there was a lot to really dig into and enjoy in these performances. I thought Blu was wonderful. But like Maisie just, like you all are saying, as someone who has this vision of early 80s Wolfsbane living in my head, it was amazing to just watch, like, because she's the most sheltered, she's the most innocent in some ways. That's part of the beauty of these, as we keep talking about, is that all of these kids, when they come together, they are coming from different places, but they're also just coming from different life experiences totally. And it gets you one of the things that I loved, the scene we were talking about a little, where Sam and Roberto are, they have different attitudes towards clothing as a result of their very different upbringings. And that's something that's always been fun with those two characters, because they come from such different worlds in that way. But yeah, I thought Maisie, it killed that part of the performance, and it was just a treat.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Sam, because I have to give it up. I thought he did a lot with this part. Even like people were making some hay. Like Sam Guthrie has that crazy of a Southern accent in the comics. He was going true to source with that. I thought Charlie Heaton of Stranger Things fame did a fantastic job with this character, and you really got a sense of how internalized his trauma was in a way that I thought came out really well. I thought he did a phenomenal job with that character, who and gave a lot of humanity to that character that I might have sort of overlooked in previous iterations, even in the comics. So it was nice to see. Now, moving on, I want to talk about this in the interest of time. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but this version of the New Mutant, this movie adaptation, adapts one of the best known and best loved story arcs, known as the Demon Bear Saga. It remains a landmark in modern comic storytelling to this day. It was the culmination of seeds planted in the very first issue of New Mutants, and created some truly terrifying imagery thanks to Bill Sienkiewicz's artwork. So my question to the panel is, why is this one of the iconic New Mutant stories? What does it mean? How does it resonate with fans? What does it mean to you? So Amy, let's start with you on this one.
Oh, I love talking about this, partly because I will sort of own up to the fact that as a kid, like I said, I bonded to those very early New Mutants things. So I got to go through what I'm guessing was happening to a lot of readers in the early 80s as I got to the Sienkiewicz stuff. And my brain as a kid went like, what is happening? Everyone looks strange. And of course, the resulting story, the artistic effect of all of that, changed me, changed a bunch of comics. Sienkiewicz was doing this in several different series. He was coming into this style that would help to define and push forward the boundaries of comic book storytelling in his Elektra book, in his depiction of Kingpin, in all of these things that he is justly famous for. And he was doing it on the X-Men spin-off book, and sort of showing at this time of tremendous creativity in the early 80s in comics, that even with the hit flagship book and their spin-off, you could take risks, you could take chances, you could present something that might make like a teen reader go, what? It looks different from what I'm used to, but I love it. So it's remembered for all of that, and it's remembered for the things that Claremont always brought to the table, which is sort of, for my money, incredibly strong soap opera storytelling, incredibly, like, you can grasp onto the themes and the relationships very quickly, because they will usually explain them to you. But it works. It's very dense. The whole thing happens in a couple issues. They're following up on seeds they planted a whopping 20 issues ago, but they're getting so much done page to page that it feels like an epic masterpiece. So yeah, read Demon Bear, read all of New Mutants. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I think Demon Bear especially has extra resonance if you read the issues leading up to it, because the very first issue, our very first introduction to Dani Moonstar, like, we get this seed planted, and I don't think I expected the payoff when I was first reading it, but you can't spell Chris Claremont without lore, so it's all there in the pages if you go back and look for it. But yeah, it is one of those things that just kind of gets under your skin, especially because right as things start getting super intense, the art style changes to Bill Sienkiewicz's incredibly affecting visceral art. The way that he draws the demon bear, you see that reflected on the big screen, but the way that you see it on the page, it just gets under your skin and just sticks with you, sticks to your ribs. You're just like, I need a shower, but then I want to keep reading this. This feels great. But I'm curious, Hector, as someone who read this afterwards, what did that mean to you? What was it like coming to that from that angle?
I always knew that the New Mutants, one of, if not the most major contribution that it made to sort of comics in general, was the Demon Bear storyline. I always known about that. Again, I'm reading my history of Marvel, my encyclopedias, all of the summations will always be like, that's the story that always comes to the forefront. So it had sort of big shoes to fill in my mind, I guess. And actually reading the story I was really, really happy that I also gladly did that investment. You guys are both saying the same thing. The reason this had such an impact, the reason it had such an effect on readers, but also the industry at the time, is you need that context. Is you got to read the issues leading up to it. I can tell people want to shortcut it, and if they see the movie and they go, "This is really cool. I want to read this comic book storyline." They can go and read it on Marvel Unlimited. They can read just a few issues of the Demon Bear Saga, like 2 or 3 issues, whatever it is. And they might think like, oh, that was really cool. But you have to put yourself in the space of readers in the early 80s, young people especially, that were following this story from the beginning, following this Chris Claremont soap opera that, again, compared to all the rest of the X books, you couldn't catch up on all the rest of the X books, right? This was before comics were digital. Like if you didn't find a copy of X-Men #1 from 1963, like you were out of luck. Like you just had to read what the characters are telling you each issue and then catching you up with their life. So the New Mutant starts and it's fresh. And to read these issues, you can do it on Marvel Unlimited. I highly recommend this great series. Amy knows I love it, the Epic Collection, because this is this first volume of New Mutants. And even before their first appearance, there's a whole issue where Karma interacts with Spider-Man and Cloak and Dagger and stuff like that happens before. And then we follow Karma with the rest of the team. But these collections give you that context because it's like a year and a half of stories. And they're not quick reads. It's that Chris Claremont. It's going to take you a while to get to. These are chunky boys. But once you do, it feels it's just whiplash, man, to go from the sort of more standard art style, which is really beautiful. Everything's kind of normal X-Men, Marvel, superhero comic books. And then Sienkiewicz comes in, Bill Sienkiewicz. And it really is a testament to what he was allowed to do, what he was encouraged to do. And you get to the Demon Bear Saga and all the characters, not even just the dreamlike stuff, but all the regular stuff just looks so different. And you go, whoa, this feels more mature. This feels more, again, a reader reading comics in the early 80s. Comics are for kids. These young people are getting permission from their parents. Like it's all cool and friendly. And you get to this stuff and then it feels like you're reading graphic novels. Then it feels like you're reading something, for college students in their 20s, the way that these characters are rendered and the emotion that's coming through. And then he gets to the dreamlike stuff. And that to me, I think is it was just a wonderful journey to get to that point because it really did set the New Mutants book apart from the rest of the X-Men stuff, because then the New Mutants became the book where it's like, this is the trippy dippy one. This is the one where we're going to get weird with it. You don't believe me? The very next issue after Demon Bear, they're going to meet a huge techno-organic alien from space called Warlock. Like that's where they're going. And even in Demon Bear, they're giving you the seeds for that because you're like, wait, what is this? And then he shows up at a slumber party. Like you just need to keep going. It gets insane. So the Bill Sienkiewicz of it, I think, is what kind of took the Chris Claremont story and really grounded it in a new way, and then shot it into that dreamlike world that from that point on, I think, made the New Mutants book what it was, and everybody, I think, had a better understanding of what it was. So, but you got to read that context, everybody. I'm telling you,
the original graphic novel, the way they all meet each other, like the twists and turns that bring them together, will sort of, for my money, get your heart completely, and then you'll be on this ride, and then by the time it pays off, you'll be tearing your hair out.
Yeah, and it's coming out of this very dark period in X-Men history as well. So yeah, I think it's definitely a breath of fresh air, both in terms of storytelling and sort of the payoff for taking that ride. So I think, as Hector said, it's a chunky boy. So if you have a sickness for thickness, both in terms of density of lore and the size of the actual graphic novel, you can do no wrong by diving deep into the New Mutants comics and then watching the movie as well.
And your way with words is just the best.
Thank you. One thing really quick before we get into Easter eggs and deep cut references and stuff like that. This is something I was curious about because I found myself thinking about it during the movie. Now, mild spoiler alert, if you're not familiar with Dani Moonstar and her powers, she can access people's psyche. She can tap into their deepest fears and manifest them. And I'm curious, what would you see if you were caught in Dani's psychic web? If it were myself, I'd probably see like a big old spider saying it was disappointed in me. But I'm curious for my panelists, not to psychoanalyze you on the spot. What would you see if you wandered into Dani's psychic web?
Oh, Spider Daddy. Spider Daddy got some issues there. I'm going to go with probably I think it's very rational, but it's truly an irrational fear of aliens. Like something would show up that would be like like The Thing, or some just gray, faceless, emotionless, to have such a vast intelligence over me, and I'm like, oh, we're boned. Oh no. So I think an alien thing would just, and that goes back to like, seeing X-Files when I was a kid and seeing, that kind of stuff. That's just that level of creepy. That's probably what I would see in my dreams.
All right, we're going to keep you far away from Dani Moonstar for the time being. But Amy, what about you?
Well, I love that both of you incorporated sort of monstrous imagery in yours, because I was going strictly with the like life experiences. So assume that all of this is happening, but everyone is a terrifying brood alien or something like that. So I was thinking it would probably be one of those pulling out memories and combining them and adding imaginary elements, and just like in the true spirit of New Mutants and our teen selves, just like mean kids, just room full of mean kids staring at you, and then probably like literalizing with knives or something like that.
They'll never make a movie out of these characters. Boo! Yeah, take that, psychic bullies. You got. But yeah, no, I feel you. The way those things manifest themselves in the movie, I thought was really awesome. I really love the design of, people will get a chance to see for themselves when the movie comes out tomorrow on digital Blu-ray and 4K Ultra HD. But I'm curious what people think about that. But let's move on because I want to talk about the sort of deep cut references in this movie, because like any comic book movie worth its salt, The New Mutants has plenty of Easter eggs in it for diehard comic book fans. And one of them, I think people have talked about a fair amount, but it's something that I got super excited about. And that is the revelation that, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to give you a chance to plug your ears. Okay, that was your chance. The Essex Corp. So we find out that one of these sort of shadowy organizations involved in this facility is not Charles Xavier and his School for Gifted and Talented Youngsters, but the Essex Corp, connected to the one and only Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister. So what were your reactions, especially as diehard comics fans, when you realized this was the connection here? Hector, let's start with you.
I think that Mr. Sinister was sort of the last kind of untapped X-Men big bad that we didn't get to see on the screen, throughout we saw Juggernaut twice. There were some great sort of pillars of the X-Men adversaries, and Mr. Sinister is definitely one of them. And the thing that I really liked about his inclusion in the Essex Corp inclusion in the New Mutant storyline is that it got me thinking about what this character's motivation would have been, how would that, would this Mr. Sinister, would this Nathaniel Essex still be obsessed with the Summers family line? I just going back to my comic book Rolodex in my brain about like what Mr. Sinister is all about and what his motivations are. So I thought it was very cool to kind of plant that seed and to kind of tease us with that, to think about, how that would have shook out. I think it would have been really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I found myself going back to the comics a little bit and wondering if they were almost going to tee up some sort of spin on the Hellions, where they were going to be like Mr. Sinister's own evil version of the X-Men to do his bidding. But I thought it was a very cool tease nonetheless. And just instantly, it's one of those subtle things where if you know, you know. And I was just like, oh, Mr. Sinister's one of my all-time favorite comic book characters, comic book villains. One of my favorite action figures, his eyes used to light up on the one that I had as a kid. There's a little switch on his back. But I'm curious, Amy, what were your thoughts when they made that reveal about the Essex Corp?
In line with both of you, it was for, if you came into this movie familiar with Mr. Sinister, it was very much in a like, yep, okay, that tracks. Like, you're doing tests, you're taking samples. You know who can never have enough samples of mutant blood? That guy. He's just got the biggest shelf in the world, and there is always one more rack with room for samples of cool mutant blood with neat powers. And so it very much makes this movie's spin on events click into place, which was satisfying because, as y'all know, like, Cecilia Reyes in the comics is one of my favorite characters. I know she's not like a headliner most of the time, but she happened to hit with me at just the right time. And so the big mislead of like, obviously she is not famous for being an agent of Sinister, that connection getting revealed totally works for what the movie's doing. And I thought was a very smart call.
Now, there were some other deep cut references in this movie for those who are paying attention. It's kind of a blink and you'll miss it moment, but there's a scene where they show a graveyard. And one of those headstones reads 138. And Amy, I believe you have a visual aid that might help explain what 138 means.
Well, when they had it out there, I was like, oh man, Is this what we're doing? I think we might be doing this. Hard to get a clean shot of it. But yeah, there are some covers from this run that are just sort of burned into our brains. And this is one of my faves.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just, I always get to be on the lookout for any time I see a series of letters or numbers in any movie based on a Marvel Comics property, because inevitably it will tie back to some particular cover. And when you see that, you're like, of course, that's it. It makes total sense now. Were there any other references or Easter eggs or anything you spotted that that resonated with you?
I got one. I want to set this up like a volleyball setup for Amy, because I was incredibly happy to see in their sort of common area room where all the characters were gathering, that on the TV there was potentially like a rerun or an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Amy, what's the significance with the connection between Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Marvel Comics X-Men character? Like, why Buffy? Why would it be Buffy, Amy? Why Buffy?
Say they were probably watching the very blatant, but only if they're particularly burned into your mind, full DVD box sets of several seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer that were sitting next to the TV in the common room throughout this film. Of course, Joss Whedon is famously a big X-Men fan and wrote one of the most popular modern runs on the comic, starring a certain Kitty Pryde in his version of his Astonishing X-Men run. One of the many, many later, by the time the X-Men had tons of spin-offs all the time, and they were just adding different adjectives on them. It is formative for a lot of folks, a great intro comic for people for a long time. The artist by John Cassaday. It is, I as a Colossus fan, you either love or hate it, Dan. I don't know where you come in on this one.
Oh, I enjoyed it overall. I appreciated it. Space bullets notwithstanding, I appreciated it at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I would say that the inclusion of the clips is probably partly about that legacy, and probably partly just about the tonal considerations that sort of the movie seems like it's trying to build on things done in that television series, which is loved by so many of us, but which is itself influenced. I mean, I think there were early interviews where Joss said, like, Buffy is partly inspired by Peter Parker with that same kind of kid with big responsibilities thing. So it all feeds each other in one big nerdy loop, I think.
I saw that and it made me wish that like there was an episode of Netflix Daredevil where those characters were watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, just to be like, watch something that was spoofing and parodying Daredevil, but then has become its own thing. And I'm like, okay, Buffy, it was inspired by characterizations of Kitty Pryde and this era of X-Men comics. So it's so cool that when these characters got their movie, that they got to kind of pay it forward and be like, yeah, we see you, Buffy, you're in here.
And the inclusion of Willow and Tara from Buffy is a nice nod to the way that like pushing forward representation comes around for that particular area of storytelling. And they're trying to pay it forward here.
Yeah, it's also just nice to see this movie very much wears its sort of influences on its sleeve, and it's nice to see them pay sort of direct homage to that stuff as well, because in interviews Josh Boone has been very open about the sort of source materials that inspired him, including films like Nightmare on Elm Street as well.
You know, it's another one that I love that I really want to mention is that there is a direct two lines that are pulled from the Demon Bear, where somebody says, hey, Eliana, like, watch out, that thing is magic. And then she turns around and goes, so am I. And I thought it was a moment in the film. And then I read the Demon Bear and I'm like, oh my God, she says this exact same. I thought that was awesome. That was great.
Yeah, that's their version of Avengers Assemble, or to me, my X-Men. It was just like, it's also just one of the best like little one-liners in the movie, because then she just like jumps through the portal and starts kicking all types of ass with her soul sword. It's a great moment in the movie. Yeah. But speaking of that, now folks, we actually have a special treat for you, because in advance of the New Mutants coming to digital, Blu-ray, and 4K Ultra HD tomorrow, we have a sneak peek at a deleted scene and an exclusive one-on-one interview with Blu Hunt, who plays Dani Moonstar in this movie. So let's take a look. So, Blue, thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited to get the chance to talk to you. I finally got a chance to see New Mutants, and I really, really dug the movie. It's one of my favorite comics, and getting to see it come to life on the big screen, especially a character like Dani Moonstar, it was so cool because, you know, this has been such a long journey for this movie. So finally getting to see it, the end result was just really gratifying. So I'm curious for you, how did your first day on set compare to your last day on set?
I think I was a completely different person from the first day to the last day, you know, like a totally transformed, different person. I had gone through so much in the, like 4 months of filming, I think. I remember my first day just feeling so nervous and excited. I had so much energy. It was like, you know, vibrating basically. And but then on the last day, I just remember like the extreme sense of relief and like excitement that I was very tired. And it didn't hit me how tired I was until we wrapped, until they called cut on the last shot, you know?
What was the last thing you shot for the movie?
I think it was me running through the snow. I want to say, I know I was wearing my pajamas outfit, the little blue shirt, and like, yeah, I know I was wearing my pajamas. So I think it was on the soundstage and we had like the snow set and the wolf was there. So me and the wolf were the last actors to wrap.
It feels like there's this real sense of bonding between you and the rest of the cast beyond what you just experienced from the characters, because obviously everyone is in character, they're doing their best acting, but like some stuff it's hard to fake because you want to really have that sense that you all like each other and appreciate each other. So tell me about working with this cast, because it's filled with such incredible people.
We really did form such an intense bond through the filming. We were all much younger too at the time, and I think they're relationships that, you know, will last forever. And I mean, Maisie's one of my like greatest friends now. The first time I ever went to Europe was to see Maisie. I went to London and I was like, whoa.
One of the things I want to talk to you as well about is the relationship between Danny and Rayne. It was a highlight of the movie for me as well, because it feels quietly revolutionary in the way that it doesn't make a big deal about how these are two young queer women finding each other during difficult times. It's not this big character-defining coming out arc like you see in so many other projects out there. So tell me a bit about working with Maisie in particular and crafting this relationship between your two characters.
I think crafting Danny and Rayne's relationship came really, really naturally to us, and we never even really thought about it. I think maybe we like practiced the kiss once, like before we're like, okay, we just need to like kiss really quick so that it's not weird when we do it and all the cameras are on us, you know? Like I remember I think we were nervous about not like being two girls kissing, but like, is it gonna like look okay? Like we had to make sure the kiss looks good, you know? But it came really naturally to us. Like we had so much fun on set, her and I. We were constantly laughing. We were really inseparable. We were really great friends on set. And I think it really translates into the friendship and the love that the two characters feel for each other. We were really excited to be playing this like incredible like queer relationship. It really meant a lot to us.
Yeah, and it's so nice to see that centered first and foremost in a gigantic superhero story, one based on the Marvel comics like this. You know, speaking of the comics as well, you know, there's so many fans out there, especially of Bill Sienkiewicz's incredible, just engrossing artwork. And I understand that he visited the set as well. What was it like getting to speak to someone who had a hand in bringing these characters to life back in the day?
Oh, it was really cool. You know, he was like a really cool guy. He was very eccentric and like funny. And I could see it was very emotional for him to see the characters come to life, you know? I think especially like with him, like Anya looks just like Ileana. And I remember him like looking at her because she looks dead on like Ileana in the comic. I think it was really special for him to see the characters he had drawn like standing in front of him, you know, physically as people. And it was really fun to talk to someone who's like been around with comics for so long.
What was your first experience with the New Mutants comics like?
I didn't know about New Mutants specifically until I auditioned. I didn't know about Dani Moonstar, and that was like when I found her, I bought all the comics. When I found out that I kind of had an inkling that I was gonna get the role, and I knew it was New Mutants and I knew it was Dani Moonstar. I went to this comic book store in LA, and I went in and I went up to the front and I was like, "Can I get like every New Mutants comic you have?" And he was like, New Mutants, like nobody, like that's just like not, it's just not, it wasn't like it's not popular, you know? So he was very like, and I was like, you know, like I wanted to just say it like right then, like I am gonna be a superhero in the comic book, so just give me the comic books, dude. But I remember just buying like this big box of them and going home and just like sorting through them and, you know, really looking at her, and I just really loved her so much.
Obviously, this was a long journey from this film, from sort of concept to completion. What does it mean to you that it's now out in the world and going to be available to people at home as well, especially now that we're all sitting at home with a need for new movies to watch?
I'm really happy it's out, and like it is like selfishly I'm happy I was finally able to kind of move on from it this summer. Like when it was finally released, I felt like a new person once it had come out. I was like, you know, yeah, I don't even know what to say about it, because I'm just happy and relieved that it's going to be out, and it's out in every form that it could be out. Like it played at drive-ins, and that was really cool, but you know, not everybody can do that. Like I don't have a car, like I don't drive, so I couldn't go to the drive-in and see it. People shouldn't really be going to movie theaters, and I'm just happy it's finally going to be seen. And I think it's kind of the perfect fun movie to watch like at home on the couch, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a great night out at the movies, but you can now have that at home. So I'm curious as well, because you know there are so many of us who are running out of things to watch. This will be a nice addition to our repertoire, but I'm curious, what would you pair this with in a double feature for a home movie night? And what is your ideal movie snack?
Oh, okay, my ideal movie snack is red vines always. Red vines are like, to me, they are the ultimate moviegoers candy.
Are you from the West Coast originally? I have to ask
Yes,
this.
I am.
Okay, this explains it. This explains
Yeah.
it. I'm of the Twizzlers camp, but I wish you well.
But red vines don't exist on the East Coast, so you didn't really. If you're from the East Coast, you didn't really have a choice. Like,
Yes.
oh, sorry, it's a little loud out there. I'm in New York, and it's like,
Yes.
you know?
Those are all Twizzlers fans out there.
Actually, for Christmas last year, I was on the East Coast, and one of my best friends, he got me a giant package of red vines and movie tickets to a movie theater because I miss them so much. But I guess I would probably pair New Mutants. I mean, I know we've said it before, but definitely like Nightmare on Elm Street. And maybe even, I was just watching this thing about how the sequel to Nightmare on Elm Street actually had a lot of queer undertones and themes. I didn't know about that. So I'm thinking Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and New Mutants.
After playing a character like Danny, who was sort of confined in this sort of facility where there was no escape, did that prepare you at all for a year like 2020? And how have you been spending the time while at home?
Actually, I really think making X-Men prepared me for 2020, because at that point I was like, well, anything can happen, you know? First, I quarantined with my mom, which was fun until it wasn't. And then I quarantined completely alone. And I felt it very transformed by the end of it. And I think, you know, COVID is awful and quarantining is really difficult. And I tried to take it in as positively as I can for myself. And I really feel like I'm a new person coming out of it. And like, I have like the things I want in my life are more reprioritized. But I watched a lot. I watched all of The Sopranos in like 5 days, which was psychotic. I know.
I respect it. I respect the hustle.
I did go insane sometimes, or I woke up on my living room floor one night and I was like, did I fall asleep on the floor? Like what? Like I would go a little crazy, but.
Look, I think anyone who hasn't gone at least a little bit crazy during quarantine is lying to themselves, or they just haven't realized it yet, and they will soon enough.
No, yeah, they're probably just crazy. They were crazy before. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, they were just pre-gaming quarantine their whole life. Now that New Mutants is out in the world, people can get it on home video, on 4K Ultra HD, Blu-ray, and digital. What is something that you'd like people to take away from this viewing experience?
I would like people to just have fun, and, you know, to, when it ends, to just like feel a little bit lighter, you know? It's a fun movie and with young people going through things. It's an homage to older films. It really is about like dealing with trauma, and, you know, maybe hopefully that can like land on people, especially during these times. Just like offer a moment of levity, you know?
I think during a year like this, we could all use a great deal of levity. And I think this is a great way for people to get that. Blu, thank you so much for taking the time. It was a pleasure talking to you, and congratulations again.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye.
Awesome. All right, and we're back, folks. That was super cool. I love getting to see deleted scenes like that. And I also had to say I had a real blast talking to Blu about this movie. I can't agree with her hardline stance on red vines over Twizzlers, because one is just a red stick of trash and the other's a Twizzler. But I had a great time talking to her.
Listen, to her defense,
yes.
if you get red vines paired with a soda, red vines becomes a straw, baby, and that's a whole nother game. Twizzlers can't compete with that. Twizzlers can't compete with that. I
can't argue with sustainability of this product. But real quick, what is your go-to movie snack? Mine is peanut M&Ms and a medium soft drink, either Coke or Pepsi, whatever they have available.
Popcorn is essential, but I will take a Junior Mint.
Okay, Junior Mint, a strong choice. Hector?
Popcorn, no butter, sprinkle that with some plain M&Ms, baby. Ooh, you get the
another classic combo.
Amy,
did you have the sweet?
Amy.
Don't they fall to the bottom?
Not if you know what you're doing, Amy. Disperse throughout. Come on, they stay at the top.
That is Hector's mutant power. He can maintain even distribution of M&Ms despite the porous nature of popcorn.
Incredible.
Yes. All right. Well, with that, it's time for our 30-second soapbox. Thank you both so much for joining me. But this is the time to get whatever's on your chest, off your chest. Talk about anything you feel like talking about. So, Amy, you are up first. What do you have for us?
I wanted to throw in a plug, actually, because while we're on the subject, if you're watching this movie or you're going to watch this movie or you just saw that adorable Blu Hunt interview and you want to know more about Dani Moonstar, I haven't read it yet. It comes out this week. There's a comic called Marvel's Voices, Indigenous Voices #1. It is coming out this week. It's part of the Marvel's Voices series, which was spinning off from a podcast that they do over there. But they got a bunch of really fabulous creators from different Indigenous origins, and they're all contributing to this anthology that happens to be coming out this week. Marvel's Voices, Indigenous Voices #1. I am very excited for it and to see what they're going to do with some of these wonderful characters in Marvel's beautiful, beautiful universe of obscure folks I want everyone to love as much as we do.
Fantastic. Everyone add that to your poll list and make sure you check it out. Drops this Wednesday, Comic Book Day. What better time to read it than now? Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. And Hector, you're up.
Read that comic book. Listen to my movie podcast. It's called the 500 Greatest Films Podcast. Shrek Forever After is the best Shrek movie. Don't at me. It's the best one. Also, Letterboxd should have TV shows on there. If you're going to do miniseries, have a full TV show as represented by one entry. Come on, because my Star Trek list is all mismatched. I need the TV shows in there as well. What else did I want to talk about? Oh, check out my new YouTube channel called Heroes Reforged, where me and my friends Adam Hlavik and Augustine Rios are watching Mandalorian. We're reading the comic book Invincible, my buddy Adam, for the first time in preparation for that new Amazon show that comes out next year. So go do that. Read the comic book that Amy talked about, and wear a mask.
Fantastic suggestions, one and all. Make sure you check out all of that amazing stuff. Thank you both so much for joining me today. Thank you to everyone at home who tuned in. And that is it for today's episode of Nerdist News Talks Back. Today's show is sponsored by the New Mutants, out tomorrow on digital, Blu-ray, and 4K Ultra HD. Based on the Marvel comic series created by Chris Claremont and illustrated by Bill Sienkiewicz, the New Mutant stars Maisie Williams, Anya Taylor-Joy, Blu Hunt, Charlie Heaton, Alicia Braga, and Henry Zaga. And this release includes behind-the-scenes featurettes, deleted scenes like you saw just now, and audio commentary between legendary artist Bill Sienkiewicz and director Josh Boone. The New Mutants tells the thrilling story of 5 teenagers with incredible mutant powers brought together at a hospital under mysterious circumstances. Together, they must rely on each other to confront their inner demons and a sinister force bent on their destruction. Can they escape with their lives intact? To find out, add the New Mutants to your X-Men collection tomorrow on digital, Blu-ray, and 4K Ultra HD. So thank you again to everyone here on the panel and to everyone joining us at home. And And also, make sure you join the three of us this coming Friday. We're going to be doing a New Mutants watch party on Twitter. To participate, buy the New Mutants, then press play on the New Mutants at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern on Friday, November 20th, and tweet along with us by using the hashtags New Mutants and Nerdist from home. With that said, we'll see you back here next Monday for a brand new episode of Nerdist News Talks Back at 2 p.m. Pacific, live on Nerdist YouTube channel and Geek and Sundry's Twitch channel. Until then, stay safe, be healthy, and have a great day. Bye-bye.